It started like any other quiet evening at my in-laws' house. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, blending with the distant sound of the television playing in the background. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered, mixing with the faint aroma of dinner that had just been cleared away. The house was warm, inviting, a place where familiarity and routine made everything feel predictable, safe. I had been married into the family for a little over a year now, and despite the initial awkwardness, I had grown comfortable with them. My husband's parents were kind, always making sure I felt at home. My mother-in-law was doting, often making sure I ate enough, while my father-in-law had a steady, warm presence, a mix of authority and quiet charm. He was a man who commanded respect without demanding it, and I admired that about him. Tonight was no different. After dinner, we all settled into the living room, each of us claiming our usual spots. My husband was deeply engaged in a discussion with his brother about work, their voices rising and falling in animated debate. My mother-in-law had retreated to her room early, as she often did when the evening dragged on. That left me on the couch, cross-legged, scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly, not fully paying attention to their conversation, but enjoying the peaceful atmosphere nonetheless. The low hum of the television added to the coziness of the moment, a late-night sitcom playing on low volume. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling the weight of the long day settle into my bones. My eyelids felt heavy, my muscles relaxed into the cushions beneath me. "You look tired." My father-in-law's voice broke through my daze. It was deep, smooth, tinged with quiet amusement. I glanced up from my phone to find him watching me with an easy smile, his dark eyes studying me in that perceptive way he had. I laughed softly, rolling my shoulders. "I am. It's been a long day." "Well, come here then," he said, patting his lap. "Might as well make yourself comfortable." I hesitated for a brief moment, though it wasn't the first time we had joked like this. My father-in-law was a naturally affectionate man, always playful but never inappropriate. He had hugged me countless times, touched my shoulder in passing, small gestures that felt natural, harmless. So, without thinking too much of it, I shrugged and slid onto his lap, letting my body relax against him. It was innocent, familiar. He was family, after all, someone I trusted. But the moment my weight settled onto him, something shifted in the air between us. I felt it immediately. A subtle tension. A heat that hadn't been there a second ago. The steady rise and fall of his chest against my back, the firm warmth of his hands resting lightly on my waist, it all suddenly felt different. A beat passed. My breath caught slightly in my throat. And then, just as quickly, I felt it. A pressure. Firm. Undeniable. My pulse spiked. My hands, resting on my thighs, clenched slightly, my mind struggling to catch up with what my body had just registered. Had that been accidental? A trick of my own mind? Or had I really felt what I thought I had? I swallowed hard, shifting slightly, pretending to adjust myself in an effort to dismiss the thought. But that only made things worse. The reaction beneath me was undeniable now. My body tensed involuntarily, a rush of warmth creeping up my neck, my breath suddenly unsteady. His hands gripped my waist ever so slightly, too slight to call it intentional, but enough for me to feel it. A slow, steady exhale fanned against my shoulder. His chest rose a little more deliberately this time, and though he didn't say anything, I could feel the way his body had locked in place beneath me, as if caught between two instincts, move or stay still. I needed to move. I needed to laugh this off, to pretend this moment wasn't happening. But I couldn't make my body cooperate. My legs felt weak, my mind hazy with the weight of realization. Finally, I willed myself to move, slowly rising from his lap, trying to act as if nothing had happened. My hands trembled slightly as I grabbed my phone from the couch, forcing a casual smile. "I need some water," I muttered, barely recognizing my own voice. I didn't wait for a response. I turned swiftly, making my way to the kitchen with a pace just shy of fleeing. My breath was uneven by the time I reached the counter, my fingers gripping the edge as I struggled to steady myself. What the hell had just happened? Had I imagined it, or was there something undeniably real in that moment? Something we had both felt? I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse still hammering in my ears. No, it was nothing. A misunderstanding. A mistake. But as I took a slow sip of water, I knew deep down the question would linger in my mind long after tonight. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. My breathing was shallow, uneven, and no matter how much I tried to shake the thoughts away, they clung to me like a thick fog. I could still feel the weight of his hands, the warmth of his breath against my shoulder, the unmistakable pressure beneath me. What did it mean? Was it truly nothing, just a fleeting, unintentional moment, or was there something more lurking beneath the surface? I wanted to dismiss it, convince myself that I had overthought it all, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. A quiet creak of the floorboards pulled me from my thoughts. I turned sharply, finding him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. My stomach twisted. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was deafening, filled with all the unspoken words we were too afraid to say. Then he took a step forward. He started, but stopped himself. His jaw tensed as he looked away, running a hand through his hair. I didn't mean for that to happen. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Relief? Disappointment? I couldn't tell. "I know," I said quickly, even though I wasn't sure if I did. "It was nothing, just a weird moment." His eyes flicked to mine, searching, as if trying to gauge whether I truly believed my own words. I forced a small smile, desperate to diffuse the tension. "We should forget about it," I continued, wrapping my fingers around the cool surface of my water glass for grounding. "It doesn't have to mean anything." He exhaled sharply and nodded. "Right. Of course." But there was something in his tone, in the way he lingered just a little too long before turning away, that told me this wasn't over. Not really. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, my mind refused to quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that moment. My father-in-law's touch. His breath. The way my body had reacted before my mind could catch up. I turned onto my side, staring at the dark ceiling, willing myself to push it all away. But the truth settled deep in my bones. Some things can't be undone. Some moments, no matter how fleeting, change things forever. And no matter how much I wanted to forget, I knew I never would. The days that followed were agonizing. I found myself avoiding being alone with him, making excuses to stay out longer, to keep my distance. But the avoidance only made it worse. Every time I walked into a room where he was, my body tensed, hyper-aware of his presence. And worse, I knew he felt it too. One evening, my husband announced he'd be working late. Normally, that wouldn't have mattered. But now, the idea of being in the house alone with my father-in-law sent an anxious shiver down my spine. I considered leaving, pretending I had plans, but I knew that would only draw suspicion. So I stayed. I kept to myself, staying in my room longer than usual, but hunger eventually forced me downstairs. The house was quiet. I told myself I could just grab something quickly and leave. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, I saw him standing there, leaning against the counter, a drink in his hand. His eyes met mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. I should have left. I should have walked out and ended this tension before it could escalate. But instead, I walked to the fridge, pretending not to notice how the air had thickened between us. "You're avoiding me," he said finally, his voice low. I froze for a second before shaking my head. "No, I've just been busy." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, but it wasn't amusement. "Right." I felt the weight of his stare as I poured myself a glass of water, my hands slightly unsteady. I wanted to run. But I also wanted to understand why I couldn't shake this. He set his drink down, taking a slow step toward me. My breath hitched, my pulse quickening. "Look, I don't want things to be weird between us." "They're not," I lied. His eyes darkened slightly. "Then why do you look like you want to be anywhere but here?" I swallowed, gripping my glass tighter. "I don't. I just think we should let it go. And you really think we can? His words sent a shiver down my spine. Because deep down, I wasn't sure if we could either. A long silence stretched between us before I finally found my voice. We have to. He held my gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. Okay. And just like that, the moment passed. He turned away, grabbing his drink, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But even as I left the kitchen, even as I climbed the stairs and locked myself in my room, I knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.